And welcome back to Extraordinariness, the podcast about ordinary people and their extraordinary accomplishments. This week's a little bit different. This week, Joe caught up with Mike, Andy and Tim, otherwise known as Three Dads Walking. They set off to walk 300 miles between their homes in memory of their daughters, who sadly were lost to suicide. What began as a memorial walk ended up turning to something much, much bigger.
We're joined here today by Three Dads Walking. We have Mike, Andy and Tim, whose extraordinary achievement was an amazing 300-mile walk to raise awareness and money for charity. I know you guys have since completed another walk. Let's first talk about the sort of the story behind the campaign and what brought you guys together.
Well, I think it does start with me, mainly because we lost Sophie first. So I'm Andy, I'm Sophie's dad. Sophie was a 29-year-old nurse up in Edinburgh. Just a lovely girl, really sociable, outwardly very happy, great person to be with and spend time with. She was going through a marriage breakup, nothing unusual really in that. No, many of us have been through it. And we were concerned about her being happy, but we weren't worried about her being suicidal. So when she took her own life in December 2018, it was completely out of the blue, sideswiped us, didn't see it coming, and it shattered us, absolutely shattered our lives. We decided very early on after losing Soph that we had to find something positive to keep us going. We didn't know what it was going to be. But when we were looking for a charity to support at Soph's funeral, a friend of mine introduced us to Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide, of which we'd never heard. And it was through Papyrus we discovered that suicide's the biggest killer of young people in the UK, which was a complete shock. And that kind of gave us a bit of a focus. So off the back of that, I ended up, initially I ran a half marathon using Sophie's entry. She was due to run a half marathon at the end of Feb, but I picked up her entry and ran it and raised a lot of money for Papyrus, and realised in the process that by being open and frank about what we'd gone through, it got people talking about suicide and suicide prevention. And that was a real positive output that folk actually found it safe to talk to their young people. So that was the start of 2019. And that just gave me a real focus and something to aim at. And so I kept going. So I got stuck into Papyrus and have helped them ever since, one way or another.
Kind of fast forward about a year, and we're talking March 2020, so just at the start of the pandemic. I obviously didn't know Andy and Mike. And my daughter, Em, she was 19 when she took her own life in March of 2020. She'd struggled for years as a younger child with something, and it was diagnosed when she was 15 with high-functioning autism. And she'd had her struggles up until that point with mental health. And once she got that diagnosis, she really rebuilt her life. She got a job. She finished her GCSE. She went to college, art college, got a BTEC, did an apprenticeship, and was just working in our local community pub. And the world started to kind of implode. We knew she was stressed about the pandemic, but we didn't realize how stressed. And basically on a Wednesday morning, we were in lockdown in our family because we were coughing, and she didn't like it. She wanted to go out. We refused her permission to go out in her car. And she just went out and tried to take her life. She died 5 days later in hospital, kind of after donating her organs, which was a traumatic time because it was just at the date she died, the day before the Prime Minister announced kind of a formal lockdown. And we were, like Andy said, we were totally devastated, absolutely devastated. Kind of hand over to Mike before you kind of come back to me.
As Tim says, none of us knew each other, but it's strange how families and friends reach out because of suicide. You almost become your own community. But we lost Beth about 5-6 days after Tim lost Emily. Again, the lockdown and COVID was a massive factor, we think, with Bethy. Bethy was just 17. She literally had the world at her feet. She was here 1 minute and gone the next. It'll never properly make sense, but we think several factors went into her stress bucket. As I said, COVID was certainly one. She was a promising vocal artist and was studying that at college. and she was starting to perform in local venues, and she was getting rave reviews. People loved her. She'd signed a recording deal. She didn't get her talent from me, believe me. But but she was really special. When I saw her performing on stage and things, it just brought a lump to my throat. But she saw everything being cancelled, including her gigs, including being able to socialize with her friends, not being able to finish college with her friends. She saw all the things she wanted to do, like the festivals she wanted to go to, being cancelled, the probability of her birthday party being cancelled and things. And I think it just built up, but this is an example of a young person maybe not being able to see past the despair that's in front of them and know that things might not be easy, but that they have a future. Tim describes this as devastating. I think if you really look at it, it's far worse than that. The devastating effect that losing a child has, but also Betty was a sister, she was a cousin, she was absolutely loved, she was a friend. And the effect that it has on those other people is just, it'll never go away, never go away. So, like Tim, we had a funeral in lockdown with about 8 people attending the funeral, just close family and friends. We couldn't even hug. And then we went basically into a very isolated time where we were just grieving by ourselves as a family in absolute shock. But this is where Tim comes along.
We, like Mike, had only had 6 people at the funeral, and we were, just in pieces. It's about 3 weeks out, 3 weeks after Beth died, so 4 weeks after Em died. My eldest daughter came to me and said, "Dad, I've been talking to somebody in Manchester. They're in the same position as us. I've been talking to a man in Manchester." Well, that's probably the words I wanted to hear. And my 21-year-old daughter was talking to some random bloke in Manchester. What had happened is that Annabelle, my eldest, had connected with Mike's daughter, one of Mike's surviving daughters, through social media. And they'd see, because Annabelle had seen the story about Beth on the internet. So dead onto the day, a month after Em died, I ended up texting and speaking to Mike. There's 2 dads who just lost their 17 and 19-year-old daughters, and we just started to talk. And that became the start of mine and Mike's kind of friendship and connection, was then just to support each other. Just a little bit later, a few weeks later, while Mike and I were talking in the start of our kind of relationship, our talks, we had to kind of clear Em's room out. We've got another family crisis, and we needed to kind of clear Em's room out. It was while we were clearing Em's room out that we found a note. We found a note from Em, and it was the most articulate note she'd ever written. And it was basically saying she was sorry, and she was, saying goodbye to us. Obviously, it absolutely devastated us. And there were 2 sentences in there that really made me think, and I spoke to Mike about it at the time. First was, don't be ashamed about what I've done. And secondly, if others can learn from what I've done, then please let them. And that, together with my wife after Em's funeral, my wife was in tears on me, as you'd expect. And she had said, "No one will remember Em in a year's time." It was just, we've got to do something. And I explained all this to Mike and said, "Look, mate, this is what I found. This is what we've got. What do you reckon?" And I kind of hand back over to Mike.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Tim became a very important part of me sort of still being here. You're plunged in a world of suicide. I'd lost my youngest daughter. It's just, I love that little girl so much. And the thought of her not being here, maybe because of an impulsive decision, but, we'll never know exactly what was going on in Beth's head. But I was plunged into a spiral of suicide myself. I just basically didn't want to be alive. I'd been, a big, strong firefighter, if you like. Not a lot fazed me. I dealt with death a lot of times, and it's not easy, but I dealt with it, and my position as sort of, providing for my family and basically as a father was just gone. I was smashed into pieces. Absolutely didn't know what to do, where to turn. And as Andy often says, you struggle with knowing how to just breathe and just be yourself. But I started talking to Tim, and Tim is, he was on the same level as me. He felt the same pain. And this is so important with going on. You have someone, even though you're surrounded by people who love you and you love, it's having someone who actually understands how you feel. And we started coming up with, we're both dads. We thought, well, we need to fight back somehow. We need to do something. And just sort of, the realization as time goes on that suicide is the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK. I had no idea. 200 school children every year take their own lives. These are shocking things, and we just didn't know. So an idea started to form, basically, that maybe that we could illustrate the extent of the problem over the UK, and maybe we could do a walk from maybe Manchester to where Tim lives out in Sholdham in Norfolk. And we'd sort of loosely talked about it. But then I started doing some things with Papyrus. A friend had put me on to Papyrus because, as Andy says, it's a prevention charity. It targets young people, and it's a prevention charity. And that is very much what attracted myself to it. So I started doing courses there on suicide prevention and suicide awareness. And I started to hear about this legendary guy called Andy Airy, this Cumbrian. Yeah, look at his face there. He's waiting for something else, aren't you? Yes, yeah. No, but the story goes that obviously Andy lost Sophie a little while before, and and he was very proactive in being outside and walking and doing his run for Sophie stuff, and yes, there's some great stuff there. So I actually bumped into Andy's son Gregor on one of the courses, and I just asked Gregor, I said, do you think your dad would be interested in maybe joining this walk if we could get it together? Cumbria, Manchester, out to Norfolk. So Gregor says, I don't know. Ask him. So I rang Andy.
Yeah, that was Gregor said he'd been on this course at Warrington, at the Papyrus head office. And he said, I was sat next to this bloke who said he's got an idea. So I gave him your number. Okay, that's good. Thanks, Gregor. What was the idea? I don't know.
And this is when sort of you guys all united together.
Yeah, so this was the spring 2021.
Mm-hmm.
The course actually where Mike and Tim met was the day before what would have been Sophie's 31st birthday.
Mike and Gregor,
sorry. Yeah, when Mike and Gregor met, it was the day before, what would have been Sophie's 31st birthday, which seems quite opposite, really. And so Mike phoned me. Yeah, it's sometime in the spring. We had a bit of a conversation. But the easiest thing to do was actually meet and go for a walk. So that's what we did. And so we met near Kirby Stephen, actually, in the limestone area of Cumbria. So not the Lake District, but a beautiful, beautiful area. And went for a lovely walk around Smardale Fell and the Smardale Viaduct Nature Reserve. So not far, but it was an incredibly emotionally charged walk as we talked about our girls and what they were like and what had happened to us and what happened to our families and what we'd been involved with and what we've been trying to do. And Mike was asking me about the money raising exploits that I'd been doing and the various things I'd been with raising money for Papyrus. And he said he'd got this idea, and he also explained about this other chap he'd been talking to in Norfolk who'd helped him, and it just started to explain that this thought of trying to show that suicide was a countrywide problem that could happen to any family anywhere, and we could highlight it by walking between our homes. I said, that's a bloody good idea. Yeah.
You never said that at the time, did you?
Well, no, I did.
Still coming out now.
Not bad, that, Mike. Not bad. But then he said, "I've got a plan. I've drawn a route. Oh, I've been thinking about the route. All right, okay then." And we walked back to his camper van, and he got out a 2010 road atlas. And on the first page, he'd put a dot at Penrith and a dot on Sale and a dot across at Kingston, and drawn the lines. Great. That's a great plan, Mike. We might need to
start of a plan.
It was. But that was it, and it was as soon as he said it and said it, that idea of highlighting that it could happen to anybody anywhere, because it just crashes into your family. And we've subsequently found and spoken to so many suicide bereaved parents, so many people in the same boat, just did not see it coming. And the young people just hadn't given their friends and family a chance to help them.
And it was just simply, 3 dads, 3 homes, 300 miles it worked out, and let's try and raise £3,000 each. It was really, really simple. And we'll just stop at anyone that will take us, So basically we'll keep on people's floors. But then Andy came up with, so that was, July 2021. We're going to start walking in September. Then Andy came up with the BBC idea, didn't you, Andy?
Yeah, so Alison Freeman is the reporter based in Newcastle, and I'd known for 15, 16 years, and she had covered a lot of stuff I'd done on the Under the Run for Sophie tag in 2019, and really helped spread the word locally, so across the northeast and Cumbria. And once we got this idea together and we committed to go, I said to these two, I've got this tame BBC reporter who I trust. Are you all right if I share this plan with her? I'm sure she'll be able to help. And when I phoned Alison and said, I've met these other 2 suicide bereaved chaps who, and we've got this idea about doing this walk. And she went quiet a bit. You could hear her thinking now the other end of the phone. He went, I think I can get this on BBC Breakfast. We got together again, a bit of a launch at the brewery, Seven Brothers Brewery in Manchester, which went very well. And I think was it the day after that BBC Breakfast requested one of us go and sit on the red sofa.
Yeah.
And then the world changed.
Yeah, the donations. Mike went on the sofa, and we were at about £10,000 in total. So we'd done our before we'd even done a step, we raised kind of £3,000 each, and we just upped our total 3,000. Let's go to £10,000 each and see where we go. We felt really guilty about that. But Mike's appearance on the red sofa, our Just Giving went up by over 40,000 within the space of about 2 or 3 hours. It was ridiculous, and it was just something. Wow, we're onto something here. So before the walk had started, we were at about £50,000, and then it was me making my way up to. We're going to meet at Andy's house to start the walk, and it was the day before the walk, so it was the 8th of October. So I'm on the train station at Preston Station, and WhatsApp goes, Daniel Craig's just donated £10,000, which is then all over the newspaper, and that absolutely. What? Daniel Craig, as in 007, the one that's trying to release his movie at the moment, because it's been delayed because of the pandemic. And that really gave us a kind of boost, because that everyone knew the 3 dads, Daniel Craig and BBC Breakfast and stuff. And we kind of came up to Andy's house in Moorland, and there was a big event in Moorland at the start, wasn't there, Andy?
Yeah, so the BBC, as part of their coverage, decided to give us a live slot on a Saturday morning as we walked out of the village.
Yeah.
But then so that was us setting off on at the start of October to walk the 300 odd miles to Sale and then on to Norfolk. And from the moment we set off, we began to realise what it was, which was way more than raising money for Papyrus. We were joined as we walked out of the village hall car park by a suicide bereaved mum who lived quite local to me, Susanna, and she walked. Well, she walked a hell of a long way with us. She was 70 odd, wasn't she? 75, 76, something like that. And she ended up walking about 15 miles with us that day and spoke to us about her daughter and how the suicide affected her family. And in the next village, we met another family of suicide bereaved parents who shared their story and actually gave Mike an order of service, Amy's order of service, which he carried the whole walk and down. And that kind of set the tone for the whole walk, that we were meeting the suicide bereaved parents who felt safe to share what they'd gone through. And that process of talking about their loss and the grief, you could see was having a hugely positive impact on them, just by being able to talk to people who knew exactly what they had gone through and were going through.
You've kind of described it as a club that no one wants to be part of, but I guess the walk highlights that there are more members of this club than anyone really realized. And that's something that, for me, looking into you guys and all the amazing stuff that you've done, it's hugely significant and not talked about. No.
I think I did a course with Mind, but before I met Andy, and they highlighted the fact there's 6,000 suicides a year in the UK, around about 6,000. What we hadn't realised until we'd had our own daughter's inquests is that, and we met many of the people on the walk who'd lost their young people, they're 11, 12, 13-year-olds, is that 6,000 figure is only the number that the coroner or the procurator fisc says they've taken their own lives, they died by suicide. There are many, many more that go down as death by narrative, with a narrative verdict or with misadventure or an open verdict, etc. In fact, I can't think of any one parent who met of a young person who took their own lives aged about kind of 11, 12, 13 that actually went down as suicide. Most of them went down as misadventure. So that figure of 6,000 that is quoted across the UK, it's way, way more than that. And that was the thing, we set off on the walk to raise some money. And by the end of that first day, we were over £200,000. So that was phenomenal. Wow, we'd raised miles of money. But all the way along the walk, we were meeting parents that had lost their young people, and none of them knew these figures. And none of them knew that it was the biggest killer of under 35s. None of them knew the scale of the problem. None of them could understand why my son, daughter took their own life, but it went down as death by misadventure. So he or she will not be included in the statistics. And that kind of all the way along the way, we got a bit righteous by the end of it, didn't we? We kind of got a bit, hang on a minute, this is the biggest killer. Why aren't we talking about it? If all these parents didn't know that it was the biggest killer, why aren't we talking? We talk about all the other risks out there in society. We, think of the effort we put into road safety, and there's about 1,400 deaths on the UK's roads. Well, just using the statistics of 6,000, there's 4 times that many suicides. And it's way, way, way more than that. So why aren't we talking about it as a society? And why aren't we addressing that risk? And why aren't we training our young people to deal with their emotions so they don't go and make that mistake like all our children or young people made and take their own lives? It just seems the obvious thing to do. You don't wait for the fire to happen to put the fire out. You invest in fire safety, you invest in smoke alarms, you invest in the whole structure around it. But we don't with suicide, and we don't with mental health. And people are so scared to bridge that gap between mental health and suicide. We won't talk about suicide because it might cause suicide. Suicide rubbish. Talking about suicide doesn't cause suicide, it prevents it. So that very much was the index. By the time we got to our village in Norfolk, we knew we'd only just started on this journey. We'd raised kind of 800,000 or something like that.
I mean, the money raised is absolutely incredible.
Oh, it's incredible. But the money raised all goes to Papyrus, to do that life-saving stuff, to man there or staff there at Big Line UK, which is a fantastic support line available from 9 o'clock in the morning to midnight. It's hopefully going 24/7 very, very soon. But that's if you're suicide, be that you're a young person with suicidal thoughts. So if you're a concerned other, you can phone that hotline and get support from suicide prevention professionals. And that was the thing. Each one of those calls cost £5. So because they're paid staff at the other end of the line. So we supported a massive amount of calls by us raising that money has supported a massive amount of calls. But in our heads, we're going, wouldn't it be lovely if we didn't need that Hope Line UK? Let's invest earlier. Let's invest when the kids are younger, give them the tools, give them the knowledge so that when they are feeling suicidal, so they know how to deal with it. And that's very much where we started to get our righteous indignation and start to approach the government.
I mean, this is incredible. And for me, like the real sort of twist in the story, it starts off very much as an awareness charity event, which evolves into, a movement lobbying the government. And, I checked in this morning with the petition that you guys have got online, and it's 154,600 odd signatures. I mean, that's incredible. And the deadline's 100,000 for it to be discussed.
It has to be, if it gets over 100,000.
23rd of March, it's the deadline, isn't it? When the signatures stop, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's when it, yeah.
So it has to be considered for debate. It's not guaranteed debate, but it is actually the third biggest petition on the government website. And both the petitions above it have been debated, and at least one below it, in terms of numbers, have been debated. So it will get
on the agenda.
Yeah, it will happen. But the thing was, what we did off the back of the first war, we wrote to the government to basically ask that question: why, if this is the biggest risk to our young people's lives, why aren't we talking to them about it? And we got an awful letter back from the Department of Education, which was, and they continue to put out some really rubbish letters from the Department for Education, which basically said that schools, it tried to justify what they'd done, which they have made a lot of changes, particularly adding a lot of mental health topics to the PSHE or RSHE curriculum. But it's quite clear that they kind of dance around suicide. Schools can talk about suicide and suicide prevention to older pupils, is what they say. So it's not compulsory. So they admit it's not compulsory. And they only say it can be talked to older pupils. And when we've met parents of 11-year-olds who've taken their own lives, you think, you're not talking to the right people here. You want to start talking to people from the earliest possible age and starting to teach them that help-seeking behaviour is the norm, not trying to solve problems yourself and bottle everything up. So the responses we got us revved up, but we did get an invitation to go to the Department for Health, where we met the Minister for Care and Mental Health, who was at that time was Gillian Keegan. And we had an interesting meeting with her, and she'd said that she would pick up. For a while, she talked a bit of politician speak, again, justifying what had been done. But she did say that she would talk to her colleagues in education and come back to us. But of course, that was early last year. But of course, last year, the government kind of imploded several times. And so the topic got lost in the sheer chaos of the government. And it meant for us, we knew we had unfinished business, and it felt like we had to go and do something else, which was prompted by an email.
Yeah.
Well, you came across that one, Tim, I think.
Yeah, there was an email basically in our inbox, 3 Dads Walking inbox, from a doctor in Edinburgh that said, yeah, I work, he was a GP, and he wrote us and said, you've walked across England, that's fine, but suicide's a big problem across all 4 countries of the UK. Why don't you walk across all 4 countries of the UK? It's like, oh, great, mate, thanks. Yeah, you come and join us. So in April, really, April last year, it doesn't take us long to plan these things. We just kind of make it up on the hoof, don't we? So we decided we'd go for it in April last year. But this time, although the fundraising is important, the big point was aiming at the petition, basically. But we didn't know that at the time. But we had a chance meeting, didn't we, with Andy Burnham?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mike bumped into Andy at an awards thing in Manchester, and I was back on the red sofa again. They were talking about suicide prevention, a campaign called Shining a Light on Suicide that had been developed in Manchester under Andy's team, really. And I was on the sofa and now we were seen as some kind of suicide prevention pundit. It's a bit of a strange thing. But I met Andy at that, and he was massively supportive. Absolutely unbelievably supportive of what we were trying to do. And I'd mentioned to him that we were chewing on this second walk, and he said, well, I'm sure I can help. Why don't you come and see us? And so we arranged to meet him in Manchester, and we sat down with him to discuss what he could do. And almost the first thing he said to us was, have you got a petition? And we kind of go, well, we have, but the government do seem to be moving in the right direction. So we kind of put it on the back burner. And he went, no, I think when his experience of being in government and being a minister was, if you got a petition going, it actually created a real strong lever to actually move the powers that be within government. And so it was Andy's encouragement that got us to revisit the petition and get that thing launched. Also, I think we had a meeting with quite a lot of civil servants at the Department for Education, the people who were actually responsible for the mental and health well-being of pupils, which proved to be a fascinating meeting because we learned how difficult it was for anybody to make a change. The status quo was the default position. And so that also encouraged us to get this petition going again, because we realised that things were going to stay the same until forced to act. And that's where we got going, and it became quite a thing.
We basically got a map and just went, right, let's walk from Edinburgh to Cardiff to London. And worked out, well, where'd you go? Well, let's go from the seats of power. So that's Holyrood, Senedd and Westminster. Let's walk between those. We wanted to bring Northern Ireland in somehow. And then it was like, hang on a minute, why don't we walk from the Papyrus office in Belfast to Stormont, which is where the Irish Assembly seat power there, even though it's not sitting at the moment. It's only a short walk, and then we can fly between Northern Ireland and Edinburgh and start the proper walk. And that's what we plan to do. And it's going to take about 32 days, 620 odd miles.
That's all right.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah.
So
barely getting warmed up.
Yeah. So we planned that, and that's what we did. We kind of met at Mike's house on the 8th of September, but tragically that was the day that the Queen passed away.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh crikey, how's that going to affect us? Do we delay the walk, or what do we do? And we'd been supported last year by the Duke of Cambridge. He'd written a letter to all three of us individually, kind of thanking us for what we were doing and supporting us. And we just thought, well, if we don't do the walk now, it's going to take another year before we can do it. And more young people are going to die in that year. And that's definitely not what the Duke of Cambridge would have wanted by the tone of his letter.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, we'll continue with the walk, but we will do it in a toned down manner. You continue on, we go out to Northern Ireland and then see what happened. But when we got back to Edinburgh on the evening of the 9th, it was clear that the Queen's coffin was coming right through where we were going to start. So we had to speak to the police and alter the start point. We normally carried the papyrus flags. We kind of had them all tied up, furled up, so as a mark of respect to Her Majesty. And basically we did a really low-key departure from Holyrood. Bear in mind the Queen's coffin was there, and would have been just totally the wrong thing to do. But all that time, the BBC and ITV and other news channels were supporting us, but in a very kind of low-key time, right until the point where we kind of watched Her Majesty's funeral, unfurled our flags, and then kind of went for it with the media, and we just kind of contained it. But the second walk was very much, we never walked alone, did we? Or very rarely walked alone. We did walk alone occasionally, but all the way through Scotland, until within 200 yards of the English border, we had people walking with us, and that's really remote parts of Scotland. It's just so much support and love for us out there, which was incredible.
It was amazing, considering we were doing it in such a low-key, respectful manner. We did wonder whether we would just disappear altogether and people wouldn't notice. But we like the previous walk, we carried a tracker so people could find us in real time, and find us they did, and people just kept coming out. So when we set off from Edinburgh, we had quite a lot of people walk with us out of Edinburgh in different ways. And then the following 3 days where you're walking across the borders, where you're right out in the wilds. I mean, most isolated places that we walked through, weren't they? On all the walks, really. But folk were with us all the time. It was just fantastic. And like the previous walk, we were meeting lots of suicide-bereaved parents. So we're having very much the same kind of conversations that we'd had the previous year. But this time, because I think so many people were aware of what we were asking for, people were coming and going, you're right, this is the right thing to do.
Everything that we talk about, we've learnt on the way. We've learnt by walking and talking, and the same thing kept coming up. They don't think the young ones were equipped to deal with the pressures of today that come in many different angles, whether it's social media, loads of different stories. I mean, even if you look at Emily, Beth and Sophie, our girls, all their stories are different, but they were all wonderful young women with lives still to live. So we talked about it, and the obvious thing to do was take it to the beginning, take it to schools and start equipping our young people as early as possible, age appropriately, probably from early years, get them to talk about their emotions, understand their emotions, make them realise it's okay to be happy or sad, and then build on that, build on it through primary school into secondary school. And yes, you bring suicide prevention into that as well. There are a lot of problems at the moment in universities that sometimes it's on the news of kids leaving school with tremendous academic qualifications, but not the life skills they need to keep themselves safe. Yeah.
And also the numbers of teachers and people involved in education that came out and found us and said, yes, you're saying the right things, but we need help as well. We as teachers need training. So we know what we should say, what we could say, and we need to be trained in signposting. So the demand is there. Also, the demand is there from young people as well. The guys at Papyrus and others have done research over this last 2 or 3 years and going into schools and young people. And the demand from young people to be supported on all things mental health is there. And so at the moment, we've got this position where the demand's there. The educationalists see it as a sensible thing to do. The only people who stopping it happening are the government. So we can't shut up, and we've talked.
You won't.
No, we won't shut up.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, isn't it? It needs to be total cross-party. It needs to be cross-department. Everyone needs to pull in the same direction here. It really does. It's, whether it's no matter what party you're in, this affects everyone. And until you're plunged in this world of, sadly, suicide, you don't realise the extent of what is going on out there. We haven't got figures of attempted suicides in young people, but I think that would be absolutely shocking. It would
Yeah.
be.
And you know, by us, if you just look on our Just Giving page from yesterday, we have this all the time. I'll read you out a comment from a dad that was posted yesterday. He gave a small donation. Thanks for all you're doing to help save young lives. Knowing that 3 dads has introduced me to Pyrus, and they've been reassuring support to my darling teenage daughter over the recent weeks. So directly, because we've been shouting about it, we've pointed people to Papyrus, and they've supported this man's teenage daughter and potentially saved her life. So that's all we're talking about. We're just talking about, pointing our young people in the right direction. It isn't rocket science, and it's making people aware of their emotions.
One of the things we have discovered by physically walking across the country, we met loads of other small charities, some really tiny charities set up in memories of young people doing some tremendous work, but a hell of a lot of work happening in lots of little bits and pieces. But local to me, there's a charity called Every Life Matters, which is a Cumbria-based charity. Again, mental health professionals doing suicide bereavement support, but also suicide prevention training. Initially, they were going into workplaces and going to talk to young people in lots of different workplaces. But last year, they started to develop a program of suicide prevention for schools. And they asked schools to volunteer to take part in a trial. And I think 16 schools stepped forward across Cumbria, and they only had, Every Life Matters only had the resource to deliver in 5. But it just showed how many schools were ready and waiting to take it in this very rural county. Anyway, before Christmas, we got invited to go and see some of the sessions that they'd been delivering to school local to me. So we all rocked up to the King Samuel School up in Alston, where we saw Vicky from Every Life Matters deliver a couple of suicide prevention sessions. She had been working with these young people for the previous 6 weeks, and we sat in with 11 and 12-year-olds and 15 and 16-year-olds and participated in this session. And it was incredibly uplifting. It absolutely showed how clearly it could be done, how safely it could be done, how controlled it can be delivered, and how engaged the young people were in it. It was a absolutely fantastic morning we spent with them, because it just showed us that it's not complicated. It's hard, it's really challenging, and it is quite scary, but it can be done, and it can be done professionally and in a careful, caring and safe way. So that's what we should do. That's what we should do. One of the things that stood out for me actually on that day, before starting these sessions, Real Life Matters and the school contacted all the parents and gave the parents the option for their children to be withdrawn from the sessions. Not a single parent did it. Mm-hmm. Not one. So the parents want it as well. Right. And so it's just like, why the hell are we not doing this? If this is the biggest killer of young people, let's talk to them about it.
And we're not blaming the schools, because the schools are judged by their Ofsted results. Mm-hmm. So the schools are being judged by a different set of criteria than really matters. I'd much rather have a child that wasn't quite as good as maths, for example, that was still alive. You know what I mean? There's a priority here, and keeping that child alive and starting them off in a safe way, and then that is much more important. But yet the metrics that we use as a society aren't about that. They're about how many A to C, not A to C anymore, whatever grades above level 4 GCSEs you get. That's how a school is deemed a success.
Education is about educating, obviously, our young people. And if we're not giving them their life skills, we're just concentrating on academic qualifications, it's not enough. They need life skills to deal with the pressures of today.
You're right. And as a parent, and my children are younger, but it just makes sense. When you look at the numbers and you look at the statistics, it's something that fundamentally should not be overlooked and should be on the curriculum. It's something that I want my children to be talking about.
It's when you hear of an 8-year-old, 8's the youngest we heard of, taking their own life. And it's crazy. We were walking as we walked Kennet and Avon Canal, and we met by loads of firefighters all the way along the route. But a couple of firefighters met us on a bridge, and they'd just raised from a sixth form where they were giving road safety lessons to 16-year-olds just before they start to drive. So they're giving road safety lessons to 16-year-olds, which is fine, but that kills a quarter of the number of people at suicide by really rubbish statistics. So it's obvious to give that suicide prevention training, isn't it? It just is obvious, but yet there's so much in a drag, if you like, in the system, and I don't get it. It's because talking about suicide has always been a taboo subject, and there's always, for those that don't realise, that aren't in the know, that there's always, we'll talk about it and we'll cause more suicides. No, you won't. Talking about it and explaining how to get over those emotions and work through those emotions will save lives. It won't take lives.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Sorry to get upset. My daughter is 8, and that's really scary.
It is, isn't it?
It's horrendous.
We want this to happen in schools where it's safe. It's a proper environment. Because if we don't, I mean, let's be honest about it, our young people all have mobile phones now. And if we don't talk about suicide, mental health problems, self-harm and things like that in these safe environments, they'll go off into their bedrooms and they'll search it on the internet, and it'll take them to the darkest of sites. It really will. It's not safe. It is petrifying. See, unfortunately, trying to get a mobile phone off young people now, they feel entitled, they should have it, but unfortunately, it's the portal into some very, very nasty places. Yeah,
you're right. Well, I mean, what you guys have achieved is way beyond extraordinary, and I mean, your story is incredible, and it goes beyond just the success of the walk and the monies raised and the signatures. I mean, I watched your mini documentary in the BBC iPlayer, which I will implore all our listeners to watch. The Pride of Britain. I mean, that must have been pretty incredible. How was that experience?
I don't know. I can't remember.
It was not what we were expected to be at all.
No.
It's so important. It's very bittersweet, isn't it? The reasons why we're there. It hurts. We've lost our girls. It is so hard, but it's important that we accept these awards and use the platform there to carry on our work.
Yeah.
But having said that, it was great being amongst all the celebrities and things like that, because some of them, told us their own stories. And they were very open and very warm. So, but yeah.
And I think that's a really good point, Mike. With the number of people, suicide doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what background you come from, how famous you are, how much money you've got, or anything like that. It doesn't discriminate. So no one should think they're immune from this. No one's family should think they're immune from this. And that has been brought out by the stories we've heard from people who you would have thought their lives are gilded. You would have thought they've got nothing. They're made. They've got no financial worries. They're absolutely made. Yet still, they're in our club. And that's why we've got to train people, because it doesn't discriminate.
No, it doesn't.
It's been the weirdest of experiences. You look back and we would rather not know each other. We'd rather have not.
Definitely.
Yeah. Careful, Mike. I don't know what you're gonna. Don't say anything. But we would rather our girls were alive. We never set off down a route that's led us to sitting in front of this screen talking to you. We would rather our girls had talked to us and hadn't told us how they were feeling. God knows what we would have done, because we wouldn't have known what to do. Then I certainly wouldn't. Yeah, so we'd rather it had not have happened. But we've learned through the people that we have talked to along this way that we're on. Not talking does so much harm, and bottling stuff up is so destructive. And actually being open and honest about your feelings and your thoughts is the way to actually help yourself. We can never bring our girls back. We'll always have those huge voids in our lives, but by helping others, it helps us. It helps us as individuals, and it gives you something to focus on. And actually, the awards have been it's just weird. I mean, it's lovely to be recognised, to be doing some good. We say rather not be there, whether it be the Just Giving Awards or the Pride of Britain or awards at the Kendal Mountain Festival, whatever it is, it's I'd rather not be receiving them, but because we know we have made a difference, it is nice to be recognised, and it does encourage you to keep doing it, because we can spot that the job isn't done.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We speak to bereaved parents just about every day. I'm waiting for a call that will come in pretty soon, and it's from 3 families that are going to walk the West Highland Way in Scotland, basically in memory of 3 kids, of their kids. People, they're so brave, they want to make a difference. But just our work has not finished by a long way.
Well, thank you so much for all that you're doing in raising the awareness and shouting about it. And no doubt in my mind, and if anyone listening, the work that you've done will certainly save lives. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you guys.
What I will say, Joanne, though, I'd say to anyone to look at their young people in their lives of any age and really answer the question, are they equipped to deal with today's pressures? Do you think they are going to be mentally resilient enough, as they get older to deal with stuff? Because if the answer's no, people really need to go on our website and sign our petition. And the petition is so easy to sign. It literally takes less than a minute.
Yeah.
You can find their website at 3dadswalking.uk. Since we recorded this interview, the government petition closed at 160,000 signatures and was subsequently debated in Parliament. But if you want to help, you can still donate to their charity through the website. This episode of Extraordinariness was hosted by Joanne Spence, produced by me, John Harmon. Music was by Coma Media, courtesy of pixabay.com.